Good evening, viewers, and welcome to another session of Mazungumzo. This is your host now with part three, a logarithmic law of value is what we are discussing. This is part three, and this is your host, Dr. Gilbert Githere, coming to your home with another session of Mazungumzo. Now we have seen production is as an entity of economics is becoming obsolete. In part two, I just wound up with that. Now we are continuing to see what replaces it. The power of the structural diagnosis. The strength of the structural diagnosis is that it refuses nostalgia. It recognizes that clinging sentimentally to labor as the essence of value explains less and less about contemporary systems. Structural theory sees the death of production more clearly than classical political economy. It identifies circulation, symbolic coding, and difference as central to how modern values appears. The limit of structural law of value. Yet, the structural law of value has decisive limits. It explains circulation, but no digitization under constraint. If any structure can generate value simply by differential position, then no event is necessary to ground claims. Value becomes self-referential, circular, vulnerable to fictitious issuance. This circularity enables surplus to grow without completed occurrence. You can see the problems you have here of the old structural law of value. Structure without constraint. A structural economy lacks an inbuilt requirement for irreversibility events, completed work, or verifiable traces. Because of these claims can multiply without production. Expectation can be priced without occurrence, and surplus can detach itself from reality. Structure explains how production disappears, but it cannot prevent value from degenerating into simulation. Algorithmic systems expose this weakness mercilessly because they require that operations complete constraints be satisfied and events be verifiable. Pure circulation is not enough. Code must execute. Transition from structure to occurrence. The structural law of value marks the end of production as the source of value, but not the end of value itself. A new foundation is required. That foundation is occurrence. Occurrence does not depend on labor or utility. It provides the point at which value is anchored without collapsing back into simulation. From this transition onward, production is no longer foundational. Structural differentiation alone cannot legitimate value. Circulation cannot ground economic reality, and symbolic systems cannot constrain surplus. Structure must yield to occurrence. So you can see here what we are looking for is value has got to give another parameter, power. It has to give in to occurrence. Proof of occurrence in the digital economy seems to be the most appropriate element or entity to replace value. But we're going to see as we continue. One sentence enumeration. The structural law of value recognizes the death of production, but it fails to ground value, thereby allowing circulation and simulation to continue generating fictitious surplus without the discipline of verifiable occurrence. That's a very important point to keep in mind there. Fictitious capital, fictitious surplus. Fictitious capital refers to legal and operative claims on future income or production that are not themselves identical with completed production in the present. Securities, speculative instruments, and tradable debts are not imaginary. They are institutionally real. Yet they are called fictitious because they are not grounded in completed production at the point of where they circulate. From fictitious capital to fictitious surplus. Fictitious capital turns into fictitious surplus when claims multiply faster than events, and value is extracted without new production. In this case, surplus is no longer a remainder from production, but a structural excess generated through circulation and simulation, detached not only from labor and utility, but ultimately even from structure's ability to constrain itself. Why structural value accelerates fictitious surplus. If value can arise simply from differential position and circulation, then narratives become instruments, expectations become capitalizable, and symbolic validation begins to stand in for occurrence. Under such conditions, fictitious surplus multiplies because nothing requires value to be pegged to an irreversible event. Structural law of value explains this acceleration, but it does not regulate issuance. It can't control it. Financialization as pure circulation. Modern finance does not wait for production. It prizes anticipation, volatility, and future conditions. Claims are pegged onto other claims. This is not merely a distortion within capitalism, it is the signature of a system in which value no longer requires completed production circulate. The result is a proliferating field of self-validating claims. So is claim upon claim, the hedge funds. I don't want to get into explaining what we are listening to. We might do it later. Why regulation cannot solve the problem. The regulation cannot solve this problem. Regulation, disclosure, and transparency cannot moderate abuses, but they do not alter the underlying ontology, even if you introduce them. As long as value can be issued before events occur based on expectation, narrative, or symbolic validation, fictitious forms will continue to reappear. The problem is not simply legal, it is metaphysical, it's more philosophical. It is very, very philosophical. So we got to deal with it from a philosophical point of view. Fictitious surplus as value without occurrence. Fictitious surplus is value issued without irreversible event, without completed work, without replayable occurrence, and without verifiable trace. What exists instead are promises, projections, and belief structures. In this framework, nonce stands as the opposite of fictitious value. Nonce has no meaning, but it has occurrence. Fictitious surplus has meaning, but no occurrence. Now you can see we are getting to the gist of the matter. Nonce is a measure of blockchain mining. It's hash. The measure in Bitcoin mining is nonce. And nonce is a measure which takes account of occurrence. It is a verification for proof of occurrence. Something has happened. So you can see here subtly in this discussion, the word nonce has been introduced. And you should note that point, that now that measure has come in, and the fictitious surplus cannot survive nonce. It's kind of its cure, antidote, a logarithmic law of value against fictitious surplus. Because nonce has been introduced, now you can see a logarithmic law of value against fictitious surplus has kicked in. A logarithmic law of values does not tolerate fictitious surplus because it does not admit claims unsupported by complete events. There has to be an event which has taken place for a logarithmic law of value to accept it. A logarithmic law of infrastructures ignores issuance that is backed only by other claims, promises, or speculative projection. They operate by counter-checking whether an event truly occurred under legitimate constraints. Anything non-operational is excluded, not because it is immoral, but because it does not pass verification. Now, those people who are using digital programs, you will see verification is a very, very important step, because even in banking, you're even asked to verify whether it is you who is doing that act with that password. So you can see verification is one of the qualifications. Nonce, the measure of blockchain mining, Bitcoin mining, accepts when nonce sees an occurrence and verifies it, then it issues tokens. Transition, the need for a new law of value. So you can see now we are getting to the point. And this is part 3 of our program. Fictitious surplus is not a deviation from otherwise stable value system. It is the natural result of theories that allow issuance without occurrence, hedge funds, futures, any kind of predictions of the future prices. It's claim upon claim without an event or a production backing it. Wherever value can be promised, narrated, or symbolically differentiated in advance of completed events, surplus detaches from reality. A new law of value is therefore required. A logarithmic law of value. In the new economic law, surplus is no longer treated as a merely moral problem. Regulation is no longer sufficient. Circulation cannot ground legitimacy, and claims cannot substitute for events. The decisive theoretical move is to admit that fictitious surplus emerges wherever value is issued independently of completed verifiable occurrence. So you can see that's a very, very important point to kind of sometimes I will go back and I will include graphics, overhead projection, and you're gonna see these things more clearly rather than just verbal. The graphs are gonna explain them even more clearly, but they just continue. The problem this chapter solves, the one we have just passed. The previous chapters established the exhaustion of labor, utility, exchange, and unconstrained circulation as the grounds of value. The remaining task is ontological, the nature of being of entities. Value has become obsolete. Production has become obsolete as an entity of economics. We have got to get another entity in the nature of being, ontology. We got to get another entity which makes the economy work. They're very, very philosophical things. The remaining task is ontological. Before economic can be repaired, one must ask what it means for something to have happened. The answer is occurrence. Why ontology must precede economics. Algorithmic economies are automated systems in which production often operates probabilistically, and human labor is no longer the primary explanatory unit. For that reason, economics can no longer proceed without first clarifying the status of events themselves. There has to be philosophizing to get knowledge in the correct track. Philosophy has got to kick in. Ontology, the nature of being of entities, which in phenomenology, Hegel discusses this fact, the nature of being, and even Martin Heidegger discusses it in Being and Time. It's a very, very important concept. Ontology must precede economics. We must philosophize. Awareness is a linguistic factor, awareness. And entities formulate because of our awareness. And if it is awareness is an ontologic, is a linguistic factor, then we got to go back and see what is going to replace value, what is going to replace production, because they have become obsolete as neoclassical economics becomes irrelevant in the digital age. Ontology must precede economics because value can only be grounded if the system can distinguish between what happened and what was merely projected. You remember the simulated trip we took from LaGuardia to LA, John Wayne Airport. It was not real. It was a simulated travel. It felt as if you traveled, but you didn't. So it didn't have any value because you didn't cover any mileage. You didn't utilize any aviation gas to fly from LaGuardia in a stimulated format to LA in California, John Wayne Airport. So it was merely projected. Simulation is a projection. It's not a reality. It's a reality in some form, but for travel, in that case, in a stimulated travel, there is no mileage covered physically, defining occurrence, because occurrence is a proof of occurrence. An event has taken place. That is what's gonna replace value. It's gonna replace production in Bitcoin mining. So let us define occurrence. An occurrence is a completed event that cannot be undone. Once something occurs, you cannot undo it. It's a reality that leaves a trace. You can trace it, and that can be verified after the fact. It does not require meaning, purpose, or utility in order to occur. It requires completion under constraint. That is its philosophical and economic force. Now, here you need to have some background of economics and a kind of a deep thought, kind of think deeply, because these kind of things they need. We have come to a place where now you got to kind of have some philosophical background to kind of digest this. And I don't blame you. Now, if you are listening for academic purpose or intellectual purpose, it kind of feel heavy a little bit, but it's understandable. A promise, occurrence versus eventfulness. Eventfulness. An event has taken place, an event has occurred. Occurrence versus eventfulness. Synonyms: a promise, expectation, or simulation may feel eventful. That's why when I say the simulated travel from LaGuardia to Duke Airport in California, it felt that it had happened. It feels eventful. But did you cover any mileage? That's the question here. But it is not an occurrence. Occurrence is never something that might happen. It is something that did happen. This is distinction matters, because fictitious surplus survives on eventfulness without completion. You have a hedge fund in your hand. You have a futures you have bought in your hand. But in most cases, those are simulations. The production hasn't happened. You're holding a claim upon a claim that some barrels of oil will be sold, in the future. And your hedge funds will get value because they were hedged on that future prediction. This distinction matters because fictitious surplus survives on eventfulness without completion. Occurrence refuses that substitution. Occurrence without subjects. And algorithmic systems do not need conscious subjects in order for occurrence to be real. An occurrence does not depend on awareness or inner experience. It depends on completion. This allows occurrence to ground categories where labor, intention, and meaning fail. Because in the digital world, we have seen labor has become obsolete. 3D production is a digital act. It does not need physical human labor as cultivating land required a few years ago. So whenever you have that factor in this economic production, digital production, labor is obsolete. And that is what is the quagmire in the present economy. We have two economies driving the world economy. You have a digital economy and an analogous economy, neoclassical economy. They are running at the same time. And that can create a vertiginous feeling, as Bernard Jean Baudrillard said it. It feels vertiginous. Because sometimes you look at things happening, they look to have an economic value, and some people are enjoying them, but some people can't. Some people are making money, and many of the people right now are just observers because they cannot comprehend what is happening. And it is very vertiginous and confusing. But you can't blame anybody. It's development. That is what knowledge is all about. You can be left behind. So I hope I'm helping. If you are getting some experience from listening to this, I am very happy. If you're not, it might be later you will be able to digest it. Things sometimes when you listen to them just first time, they feel confusing, but they might become enlightening. And the darkness must come unto light. That's Bob Marley. And in the darkness, they must always come unto light. Occurrence and verification. Occurrence and verification are inseparable. That's why you see once you enter your bank, you enter your user ID, you enter your password, they go to ask you to verify whether you are really a human being or an alien. And you have got to. That is verification. Verifications and occurrence are twins. They are inseparable. Verification does not interpret meaning. So you can see philosophically, previously when you read a statement, you are looking for meaning. In digital world, you should be looking for verification. It confirms that an event occurred, verification. In a logarithmic economy, this relation connects ontology to value, the nature of being of that entity. You can see that this relationship of occurrence connects us to reality because it replaces value in a very important activity of human beings. Human beings by nature, they conduct business. Their conversation is all business based. Oh, you need somebody to do this thing for you tomorrow. How much is it got a cost? When are they going to finish it? And most of the statements in our language, if you listen to them, they are based on economics, like banks, the river bank, the source of the river, the resources. So most of the things have got a background of an economic situation, or life. That's another topic. Only occurrences can be verified, and only economic events that are verifiable can ground value. You can only have value if you have gone to the land, taken a hoe, cultivated a portion of land, manured it, gotten some good seeds, planted them, the rain comes or you water them, the plants grow to maturity, then you go harvest them. Then when you harvest them, you have produce, and then you sell them to your neighbor because they have value, those products that you have produced, the yields from your farm. So all the time, you see land, labor, capital, ground value. And what does grounding of value? Giving it meaning. Occurrence against structure. Now, occurrence, how it cannot agree with the structural law of value of Jean Bourriard in Simulacra. Structure explains relations among elements, but occurrence explains why there is something to relate in the first place. Without occurrence, structure floats, codes circulate, and value simulates itself. Occurrence introduces discipline by allowing a system to say clearly that something happened or did not happen. Now, this paradigm I'm trying to sell to you or I'm discussing is an original idea. So you might disagree with it totally because you might have other facts which do not concur with what I'm saying. That's what knowledge is all about. I am not saying this thing is final. Thomas Kuhn told us in scientific revolution or knowledge which is based on science, changes are incremental. They come in small, small bits. Occam's razor, the simplest format. So I might just be talking and somebody there is thinking, what's wrong with this guy? That's correct. This is my original thinking. So occurrence here is replacing value. And until we meet again for part 3 of this program, this is your host, Gilbert Githere, Dr. Gilbert Githere, saying bye for now, ciao, ciao, until we meet again. Prepare for part 4.